It looks like Sakura's about to meet her rival for episode 8. But first of all, the story begins with a dream sequence, but instead of Sakura being in the dream, it was someone else. Remember the child that was on the museum's roof just recently in the last episode? Well, he's there and he's staring at the radio tower just like what Sakura did. And he's in his green battle suit. But he's not alone because Kiro's with him. And what the kid did next was unbelievable. He started jumping from one building to the next. Then back to the present in Sakura's upstairs bedroom at the Avalon residence. Kiro tries to wake her up for having this nightmare about that kid in his green battle suit. So finally, after Kiro woke her up, she sits up, and after being swiped away by Sakura by accident anyway, that's when he's asking her, maybe you should explain all of this to me? Well, as a matter of fact, Sakura says, I couldn't help but think to myself about that dream I had. And it's been the same every night. Except this one's different. There's a kid inside of it. But that's not all, Sakura says, because in my dream he has all the cloud cards. But suddenly, before Sakura can explain even further, there was a knock on the door. It's her brother, Tori. So Tori comes in, or peeked inside, so to speak. He says, what's going on in there? Did I hear something in there? I thought I heard you had a company inside. No, there's no one here, Sakura said. Are you sure? Her brother asked. I thought I heard something in there. Nope, I'm sure, Sakura says. Besides, everybody knows that stuffed animals don't talk anyway. If you say so, Tori says. And so after he left, that's when Sakura throws a pillow at a door, on Tori's way out, so to speak. So after Sakura's brother left the room, for Kiro, that was too close of a call. He almost caught up to him that time. But then, when Tori comes back moments later, he says, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I'll be leaving in 10 minutes. And so then after that, he left. So Sakura, still in her upstairs room at the Avalon residence, she couldn't help but wonder, what does this dream mean? What's the kid want? And what's he doing in my dreams anyway? Oh, come off it, Kiro says. You got bigger things to worry about than that. Like maybe capturing cloud cards, perhaps, Kiro says. I know that, Sakura said. Well, Kiro says, you know the saying, expect the unexpected. So after Sakura got dressed, she went to meet up with her brother outside, who's waiting for her. So Sakura and Tori's father, Aiden, says, hurry up in there, you're gonna be late. I'll be right there, Sakura says. So after Sakura meets up with her brother, they're now heading off to their schools. So now in her rollerblades, if you will, that's when Sakura went up to catch up with her brother on his bicycle. So now that Sakura had caught up to her brother, well, literally, and that's when brother and sister had met up with Julian, who's Sakura's brother's best friend. So, anyway, Sakura, Tori, her brother, and of course her brother's best friend Julian had all head off. And that's when Tori apologized to his best friend for being late because he said in his case that his sister Sakura had a, how you say, an intimate conversation. So when Julian looks at Sakura, he asks her, are you alright? I'm fine, Sakura says. I just had a nightmare last night, that's all. So Julian says, I can tell you a little secret. Dreams can tell you what you can expect, like a premonition or something. And that was something that Sakura will never forget, after that advice from Julian, of course. You know, I had the same dream as you did, but only different, Julian says. This morning I dreamt I had French toast for breakfast. And guess what? It came true just like that. So when Sakura arrived at her school, it's now almost 9:30 in the morning. Well, good news, she makes it to her classroom on time to join up with her best friend, Madison. And Madison just told Sakura the good news that recently she just got her new video camera. Of course, it's really? And Madison says, well, yes, this is even better than my old one. And of course, here's something that's even better. It has more color than my old one, too, Madison said. And Sakura says, well, that's great. Then minutes later, Sakura's other best friend Rita comes in to say hello to her friends, Madison and Sakura. Of course, also in the classroom were Nikki and Chelsea, and that's when Mr. Tarada, who's their teacher, comes in minutes later to ask everybody to sit down in their desks, and so that's what everyone did. The first thing that Mr. Tarada said to the class was, I hope you all enjoy your weekend, because guess what? I got some good news. He also said that there's an exchange student that's coming inside the classroom. We're about to meet him in just a minute. Then what Mr. Terada said next was shocking when he said, oh, by the way, the kid's name is Lee Showron. Then he looks over his shoulder at the door and he says, you can come in now. And that's what Lee did. And what Lee did is that he stood right in front of the class and he's now face to face with Sakura. But that's not all. Lee's wearing the exact same school uniform as everybody else does. But that's still not all. Sakura couldn't help but think to herself that that's the exact same kid that was watching her, her best friend Madison, and Kiro on the museum's roof the previous night since episode 7. So Sakura couldn't help but think to herself that that was the exact same child that she's been dreaming about previously that was staring at the radio tower. And he's in his green battlesuit, but we'll get back to that later. Then Sakura remembers, expect the unexpected, just like what Kiro said earlier before she left. Then Madison looks at Sakura and says, I think this kid is staring at you. Because she can tell that there was something off with this kid, meaning Sakura. So, Mr. Tarada, after introducing Lee to the class, now we should find you a place to sit down, he said. Then Mr. Terada made a suggestion with Lee that he should sit right behind Sakura. So that's what Lee did. And by the time that Lee did so, Sakura had a funny feeling about it that this could be a very long day. In class, no doubt. So after class was over later on that afternoon, it was during recess that Sakura and Lee had met face to face. And guess what Lee had? Something that Sakura never saw before. A lazing board. What the lazing board did is very interesting. It tells Lee who has the cloud cards and even better, tells him where they are. And by the time that the lazing board did its thing, guess what? It tells Lee that Sakura has the cloud cards, 9 of them to be exact. So after Lee knew the truth, he says, then it is true. You have all 9 cloud cards. Sakura was really confused. She's like, what? He says, you've heard me. This leasing board knows what you have. Now hand over those cloud cards. 9 of them to be exact. So Sakura had to turn to plead her case to say, yes, I have all 9 cloud cards, but even if that's the case, I'm not giving them to you. As a matter of fact, Sakura says, I'm capturing them for Kiro. Then Lee says, wait a minute. You mean the Kiro barrels? The guardian beast of the seal? That's right, the one and the same, Sakura said. Then Lee has his turn to say, what kind of a guardian beast like that lets you handle it anyway? Sakura then explains to Lee that just 7 episodes ago, her life changed forever, and that's why Kiro had chosen her to catch the cloud cards in the first place, was because she had accidentally let them out. Then Sakura says, well, up until now, I had no idea what they were until I found them in the cloud card book. So that's why I was chosen to begin with, by Kiro himself. Then Lee says, really? Kiro's the one who should be guarding them to begin with. Then Lee had a thought and then asked Sakura a question and says, wait a minute. You mean to say that they all escaped? That's right, Sakura said. By accident, of course. But you only have 9 of them so far, right? That's what Lee was asking Sakura. Of course, Sakura said, but I got more to go. So I'm working on it, okay? And let me get this straight. You're a card captor, Lee says. You know something? Lee also said in his case, he told Sakura how pathetic it was. So I've heard, Sakura said. And Sakura says, well, there's just one thing I gotta know. How do you know about him anyway? What do you know about it? It's none of your business anyway, Lee said. But it doesn't matter now. Because in my case, I'm taking over, Lee said. So Lee says, give me the cloud cards, but Sakura refused. So who do you think you are anyway? Sakura says. Why, you'd be very surprised if I told you that, Lee said. Now for the last time, Lee says, give me the cloud cards. Then minutes later, Madison, who's Sakura's best friend, looks for her best friend Sakura everywhere. And that's when she saw both Lee and Sakura having a conversation with each other. So back with Lee and Sakura, who unfortunately are having a tug of war match with each other with the cloud cards. But then moments later, Sakura's brother Tori shows up, and he broke up the fight. So after Lee looked over his shoulder to look at Sakura's brother Tori, he decided to go one-on-one with him rather than with her. So Madison runs over to comfort her best friend the best way she knew how. As for Sakura's brother, he's face to face with Lee, who had a confrontation with his sister. So back with Tori and Lee are about to have a one-on-one with each other. That's when Tori, although supportive, says that nobody picks on my sister but me. Then Tori said to Lee, if I were you, I'd go away before someone gets hurt, namely you. Well, long story short, that watching it happen was Sakura and Madison, and they just couldn't do a thing about it. But wait, Tori's not alone because someone else is approaching him, and he just brought a bag of food. It's Sakura's brother's best friend, Julian. And by the time he goes over the fence to break up the fight, and just in time too, he says, hey, is anybody hungry? So by the time that Lee saw Julian, he couldn't do a thing about it. He was frozen like a statue. So, as Julian was passing out food to both his best friend Tori, who's also Sakura's brother, and also Sakura and Madison, he says, come on, there's plenty enough for everyone. Back with Lee, he still couldn't move. He was in silence. That was until Julian, who's Tori's best friend, moved up closer to him with a paper bag in his hands. Then, long story short, after Lee refused to take anything from Julian, that's when he ran off. After Lee ran off, that's when Julian says, maybe he isn't hungry. Then, sometime later, after the school had ended, that's when Madison and Sakura were walking with each other. As they were walking, Madison asked her best friend Sakura a question. Do you really think that Kiro will do something about this Lee character? Of course he'll do something about it, Sakura says, because after all, he is the guardian beast of the seal. And of course she's not kidding. This, of course, says in her case that if she knows Kiro, and she probably does, he's probably sleeping upstairs in her room right now. And wouldn't you know it, there he is in Sakura's upstairs bedroom at the Avalon residence, and he's sleeping. So back with Madison and Sakura, who were continuing to walk, that was until they heard something really, really weird up in the sky. Thunder, so to speak. So Sakura and Madison knew what to do. They had to find a place to hide at Penguin Park. So meanwhile there, good news, Madison and Sakura found some shelter underneath the King Penguin slide at Penguin Park. Now that the girls had made it underneath the King Penguin slide at Penguin Park, that's what Sakura saw something very weird. And then she at first saw it was a rainstorm, but there's not a raindrop in sight. But wait, what's even weirder is that a bolt of lightning comes out of nowhere and lights up all the lampposts all out in a row. But then all of a sudden, they just went out. But luckily, back with Sakura and Madison, they're still hiding underneath the King Penguin slide at Penguin Park. But then something else happens. An electrician comes nearby, and next thing you know, a bolt of lightning comes out of nowhere and scared him away, and so he ran off. So, long story short, after that storm subsided, it was now time for Madison and Sakura, now that they know that it's safe to come out, they left Penguin Park. So meanwhile, at the Avalon residence, Sakura goes upstairs to her bedroom to not only find Kiro sleeping, but she had to wake him up. And the reason why she woke him up is because Sakura had to explain to Kiro what just happened earlier with her best friend when she had to hide underneath the slide at Penguin Park along with her best friend. But first, before that could happen, Sakura explains about the new kid that she just met at school earlier, Lee Showron. And get this, Sakura said that the moment she met Lee, she knew that he was going to take the cloud cards away from her. 9 of them to be exact. Well, it's like I told you before, expect the unexpected. Besides, I chose you to be a card captor to begin with, Kiro said. Besides, catching cloud cards is more important than the schoolyard rivalry, Kiro said. The first thing you have to deal with, Kiro says, is that first of all, there's some serious magical stuff that's going on. Second of all, there's going to be a few bumps in the road ahead of you. Kiro, don't you get it? Sakura says. He tried to take the cloud cards earlier. Well, maybe it's about time you learn a little cloud history more than you know, Kiro said. You see, Carol explains to Sakura, many sorcerers have many powers, and it's been passed on from one generation to the next. So you see, sorcery can be passed on from one tradition to another. So in other words, Clow Reed, as legend has it, has such a bloodline that nobody could recognize. Don't get it wrong, Sakura says. It sounds interesting and all, but what's this got to do with Lee Showron anyway? Well, Kira says, I hate to break this to you, but you have to brace yourself for a shock. So guess what? Lee Showron, according to what Kiro says in his case, is Clowry's descendant. When Sakura heard that, she says, What? If that's the case, she says, and if it is true that Lee is part of the Cloud Dynasty, then maybe I should have just gave him the Cloud cards to begin with, she says. I'm sorry, Kiro said to Sakura, but it doesn't work that way, and I'll explain why. Oh, and by the way, try to keep up, okay? Besides, as I explained to you before you found that clown book to begin with, you were chosen by me. Remember? And by the way, Kiro says, it was you who broke the seal to begin with. That's why I chose you. There's something else I didn't tell you, Kiro says. Only a person who has the special kind of power to break this kind of seal, and you, Sakura, were that person. And besides, those cards were yours to begin with, and you know why? Because you're the one who sealed them, and you signed those cards yourself. So you have much of a right to be a card captor. Suddenly, before Sakura's eyes, all 9 of the cloud cards that she's caught so far has magically, in the sense of a word, danced all around her. Then Sakura was told by Carol, so you see, you've been chosen. It's your destiny. Then suddenly the phone rings. So Sakura went ahead and answered her cell phone. It's her best friend, Madison. So Madison says, Listen to me, Sakura. I need you to look out the window right quick. And so Sakura did. And what Sakura saw was unbelievable. The same thunderstorm that she and her best friend had seen when they were at Penguin Park earlier that afternoon. So Madison told Sakura, Well, you know what this means. You got a cloud card to catch. I guess you're not kidding, Sakura says. I might as well get on the job right away. I'll meet you in 10 minutes. And so Sakura ends the phone call with her best friend. So now that Sakura had met up with her best friend just gave Sakura a cat battle costume. Very impressive, I do say so myself. Then Medicine says, Wait, here's the best part. The costume you're wearing now is 100% electrical proof, which means that it can protect you. So, long story short, after Sakura saw a little bit of a light show, just like what she saw at Penguin Park earlier, that's when Sakura's best friend says, Don't worry, someday you'll thank me. And of course, she's not kidding. So, thanks to the fly card, Sakura now knows what to do. So she takes off, and along with Kiro. So, down below, Madison, as always, has it on her video camera. While flying around in the sky, of course, Kiro asks Sakura a question. Now, Lee did say he had some kind of device with him, right? And Sakura says, yeah, it's called a lazing board. Well, that lazing board may give him quite a edge, predictably speaking. And this can mean a serious problem. But don't worry, you're a rightful card captor after all. And of course, he's not kidding. So, in other words, in Kiro's case, Sakura has to get to the Thunder card first, before Lee did. So, anyway, speaking of which, back with her. Anyway, long story short, after Kiro says to Sakura, you have to transform it to its visible form. How am I supposed to do that? Sakura asked. And that's when, before you know it, something had attacked both Sakura and Kuro again. So that means there was no time to lose. So Sakura has to get away from the Thunder's attack. And quick. So, long story short, after Sakura had used the jump card, she went up on the roof. But she's not alone. That's when she saw Lee, after he told her how pathetic she is. And just like what Sakura had suspected, Lee was wearing a green battle suit, just like what she was dreaming about earlier. But there was something else. He has a sword, so he unleashes the power of lightning to knock the Thunder's attack away from him and Sakura. Then, after Lee got done doing that, he jumped to the other side of the roof, and that's where he and Sakura saw it. A Thunder Beast. That's the visible form, by the way. So, after Sakura joined up with Lee, so Sakura says, wait, that's Thunder's visible form? That's right, Lee says, and you're looking right at it. Then Lee pleaded his case to insult Sakura by saying, you really are hopeless, do you know that? Then Kira says, well, listen to me, you two. So while you two are busy arguing, this Thunder Beast is going to be a serious problem if something isn't done fast. Then Sakura had a suggestion, and then she says to Lee, I'll use my Windy card. No way, Lee says. Put the card away. Besides, Windy doesn't stand a chance against Thunder anyhow. Why not? Sakura says. I captured other cards with this. So Kira says, excuse me, you two, in case you two haven't noticed that we're going to have a serious problem. In the meantime, Thunder's visible form gets getting closer and closer to Lee and Sakura. Then Lee asks Sakura a question. You do have a shadow card, right? As a matter of fact, I do, Sakura said. So we know what this means. Lee has a plan. First of all, he uses his sword with the power of lightning to get the Thunder Beast away from the roof and had it landed on the ground. Then, after that was finished, it's now up to Sakura to use the Shadow card, in which she did. And luckily, the Shadow card just wrapped up the ball around the Thunder's form. So it's now up to Sakura to capture the Thunder card, and luckily she did so. So now that the Thunder card is caught, that makes it number 10 on the list, for Sakura, of course. Oh, by the way, Sakura and Lee are now at the school's grounds. So after their teamwork, that's when Lee asked her a question. You really don't have a clue about this, do you? Then Kiro has to turn to plead his case by asking a question. Well, someone's got to start somewhere, right? So Kiro flies closer to Lee. So Lee says, who's this? And Sakura says, Lee, meet Kiro Barrels. And he said, really? That's Kiro Barrels? Looks like a stuffed animal to me, Lee says. And let's just say Kiro's not exactly happy with that insult, especially from Lee. So after Kiro had bitten Lee's finger, that's when Sakura says, well, it serves you right, doesn't it? So Lee heads off after Kiro had pleaded his case to say that he was appointed by the legendary Clow himself. Oh, sure, Lee says, a lot of good that did. And then minutes later, Sakura's best friend Madison shows up. So after Madison runs to catch up with her best friend and met her at the school grounds, Madison can tell that Sakura's upset. So Madison says, what's wrong with you? You did catch a card, right? I did. That's true, Sakura says, but I'm afraid, as the saying goes, that this rivalry between Lee and I, this is only the beginning. And you know what? Sakura's right in her case since there are more cloud cards left to catch. So that ends episode 8.